Rain came down soft and steady on 6th Street, blurring the neon into watercolor smears on the asphalt. A black SUV eased up to the entrance of the Driscoll Hotel. Old limestone, warm amber light, the kind of Austin landmark that made you feel like the city still had some memory left. The driver stepped out, umbrella already up, moving around to the passenger side with the kind of calm that said he'd done this before. "Good evening. I'm your driver for the next 3 days." From the portico, a woman emerged. Beautiful, composed, dressed like someone who had decided long ago that first impressions were simply contracts she intended to win. But her eyes carried something underneath the polish. Something that looked a lot like exhaustion that had been living in the same place for years. She looked at him like she was already deciding whether this was going to be a problem. "I don't like people who talk too much," she said. Cool and direct. Not cruel, just efficient. He held the door open and offered a small smile that didn't ask for anything. "Then I'll just listen." Nobody in that moment, not the valet watching from the steps, not the couple arguing quietly near the fountain, nobody could have known that this $1,100 job was about to change 2 lives in ways that no spreadsheet could have predicted. Before we get there, I want to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Now, let's begin. Marcus Webb was 33 years old. He had the hands of someone who had fixed things his whole life. Engines, fences, gutters, a marriage that ultimately couldn't be fixed no matter how hard he tried to hold it together. His days started before 5 in the morning and ended after his daughter Zoe had fallen asleep with the lamp still on and a library book open on her chest. He had worked every kind of job that came his way without complaint. Mechanic shops in the summer heat, warehouse loading docks at 3 in the morning, landscaping crews on days so hot the air shimmered off the pavement, and private driving jobs whenever the dispatch app sent one his way, because private clients paid better, required less small talk, and left him alone with his thoughts on the long stretches of highway. His wife Danny had passed 2 years and 4 months ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, fought hard. She had been 31. Zoe had been 6 when they lost her. She still sometimes walked into his room in the middle of the night and stood beside the bed quietly until he woke up. Not crying, just needing to know he was there. He always was. He always pulled back the covers and made room. The medical debt wasn't something Marcus talked about because talking about it didn't make it smaller. He had a system, a spreadsheet Danny had taught him to keep, with every payment, every due date, every number color-coded in a way that would have made her laugh if she were still here to see how faithfully he maintained it. He was making progress, slowly, but steadily. He had made peace with the shape of his life. The call from the dispatch service came on a Thursday afternoon while Marcus was in the parking lot of his apartment complex, resealing a neighbor's cracked windshield for $30 and a plate of tamales. The dispatcher had the tone of someone reading terms and conditions over the phone, brisk, a little apologetic about the short notice. "We need a private driver. 3 days, starts tomorrow evening. Client just flew in from New York. She's a business exec, very particular about professionalism and discretion. Total job, $1,100. You interested?" Marcus did the math without even meaning to. Zoe's tuition deposit for the spring semester was $780, due the week after next. Her winter boots had a hole in the left sole that she'd been hiding from him because she'd overheard him on the phone with the collections department and decided at 8 years old that her boots were not the crisis they needed to discuss. He had noticed. She didn't know that. $1,100 was Zoe's tuition deposit and her boots, and $60 left to breathe with. "I'm available," Marcus said. "Send me the details." He spent that evening washing the SUV, a dark gray Ford Expedition he'd bought used 2 years ago and kept in meticulous condition because it was, functionally, part of his livelihood. He vacuumed the seats, cleaned the windows from the inside out, and tucked a small bottle of cold water into the center console cup holder because some clients appreciated that and none of them complained about it. Before he went to bed, he checked on Zoe. She was already asleep. Her stuffed sea turtle, named Gerald for reasons she'd never satisfactorily explained, tucked under her arm. On the dashboard of the SUV, in the spot where most people stuck parking permits or parking service cards, Marcus had taped a piece of yellow construction paper. Zoe had drawn it the morning of his very first private driving job 2 years ago. His face, rendered in orange crayon, ears significantly larger than life, a smile that managed to convey pure adoration, even though it was slightly sideways. He'd never taken it down. Vivian Cole stepped out of the Driscoll into a light Texas rain, wearing a tailored charcoal blazer and slacks, a single piece of luggage behind her. Efficient, deliberate, no extra weight. Her heels hit the wet stone with a sound that said she was already running a schedule in her head. She was the CEO of Cole Meridian Logistics, a company she'd built from a regional freight broker into a national firm with operations in 11 states. She'd been in New York for 31 days negotiating a partnership deal that had taken 7 months to close. She had eaten 3 dinners in that time that she would describe as genuinely enjoyable. She had slept on average 5.5 hours a night. She was back in Austin for a week before she needed to fly to Denver, then Chicago. Then, if her board got what they wanted, a permanent relocation to New York that she was still refusing to agree to on the grounds that she hadn't yet made the decision. Though people who worked for her would tell you privately that Vivian Cole not saying yes to something yet was not the same as saying no. She assessed Marcus with the speed and thoroughness of someone who had learned that first impressions were data. The SUV was clean. He was neat. White shirt, dark slacks, nothing excessive, nothing sloppy. He held the umbrella the right way. He'd already opened the door before she reached for it. She got in. "I don't like people who talk too much," she said, because it saved time to establish this up front. "Drive where I tell you, arrive on time, and we won't have any problems. Then I'll just listen." She had already pulled out her phone, but something in his tone, not smart, not sarcastic, just calm, made her look up for a half second before she started answering emails. Marcus started the engine, adjusted the climate control without asking. The temperature in the vehicle shifted slightly warmer, exactly what she would have requested. She didn't say anything, but she noticed. They moved out into the Austin rain, the city lights bleeding orange and gold off the slick streets, and Marcus drove with the particular focus of someone who had learned the difference between rushing and moving with purpose. They were 3 blocks from the hotel when Vivian looked up from her phone and saw it. The crayon portrait on the dashboard. Big ears, sideways smile, yellow construction paper, edges softening from 2 years of dashboard heat. A child's handwriting in the lower corner. Daddy in purple marker. Her typing slowed, then stopped. She studied it for a moment longer than she'd intended. "Your kid draw that?" It came out softer than she'd planned. "Yes, ma'am, that's Zoe. She made that the first time I took a driving job like this. It's been up there ever since." He paused. "She said it would keep me company on the long roads." Vivian looked back at her phone, but she read the same email 3 times without retaining a word of it. Something had shifted. Something small. Like the first hairline fracture in a wall that looked solid from the outside. The first day was professional and quiet. Vivian made calls in the back seat in the clipped, confident language of someone accustomed to decisions where several $1 million hung on the exact phrasing of a single sentence. Marcus drove without interrupting, without offering opinions, without making the kind of small talk that she'd already told him she didn't want. But he also anticipated. He always had a water bottle ready without her asking. He knew when she needed silence versus when she'd finished a call and the tension in her shoulders dropped slightly and she would tolerate a smooth change of radio station. He took routes she hadn't specified that turned out to be faster. He never said "I told you so" about any of them. By the end of the first evening, Vivian had noticed all of this and filed it away under a category she didn't yet have a name for. The second day began with a 3-hour drive west. Vivian had a meeting at a private resort outside Fredericksburg, a hill country property where a group of potential investors gathered twice a year for what they called a symposium, and what most people who attended privately called an extremely expensive weekend of deciding who to trust with their money. She needed to be there by 2 in the afternoon sharp. The hill country rolled out past the city in shades of cedar green and limestone white, dramatic in the early morning light. Vivian worked from her laptop, the cursor blinking over a presentation she'd already revised 4 times. About 90 minutes out, Marcus spoke. "Have you eaten today?" She looked up. The question wasn't accusatory. It wasn't solicitous in the performance of care way that people in service roles sometimes deployed. It was just practical, like noting that the gas gauge was low. "I had coffee." "That's not food." He said it the same way he'd said everything else. Evenly, without judgment, without making it into something bigger than it was. "There's a diner about 15 minutes up ahead. Family place, been there since the 80s. The food's good and the drive after this gets winding. Better not to be hungry on mountain roads." Vivian considered refusing on principle. She was aware distantly that she was trying to maintain a boundary that was beginning to feel less like professionalism and more like habit. "Fine," she said. 15 minutes. Garcia's diner sat off Highway 290 like it had grown there. Low white building with a red metal roof, a hand-painted sign, 4 trucks in the gravel lot, window boxes with marigolds that had survived into November. Not a place Vivian would have chosen from a phone screen. Inside. Checkered floor, the smell of coffee and something baking, booths with cracked vinyl patched with electrical tape, a counter where 2 men in work boots were talking about whether a particular stretch of fencing was going to hold through the winter. Vivian sat across from Marcus in the corner booth. The distance between them, the careful architecture of client and hired driver, felt suddenly harder to maintain at a table this size, in a room this unpretentious. She ordered a salad, dressing on the side. Marcus ordered the blue plate special without looking at the menu. "You've been here before," she said. "Every time I drive this road. Ray and Carmen Garcia. They're good people." He looked around the diner the way people look at places that have meant something to them. "Couple years ago, right after my wife died, I had a stretch of about 3 weeks where I wasn't finding enough work. They fed me without making it feel like charity. Just put a plate down and didn't say anything about it." He paused. "I try to bring people here when I can." The words about his wife landed plainly. No performance of grief, just the factual weight of something he'd learned to carry. "I'm sorry," Vivian said. And then, because it had come out sounding reflexive, "I mean that." "I know you do." He said it without sarcasm. 3 years ago, Zoe was 6. "That's a hard thing for a kid." "It's a hard thing for everybody." He was quiet for a moment. "Some days it feels like a different lifetime. Other days I'll be driving and a song will come on and for about 4 seconds I forget. And then I remember again and yeah, it's still there." Carmen Garcia came by the table, warm, mid-50s, a woman who moved through her own diner with the proprietary ease of someone who had worked the same floor for 30 years. She greeted Marcus like family, brought the blue plate without his asking, slid Vivian's salad over with a smile that asked nothing in return. Vivian watched Marcus watch them. The realness of it, the absence of calculation. She ate her salad with more appetite than she'd expected. The trouble started about 40 minutes past the diner. A grinding sound from somewhere beneath the hood. Then a loss of power that was gradual and then sudden. Marcus steered the expedition to the shoulder of a 2-lane hill country road with the controlled calm of someone who'd handled worse, which, she would learn, he had. The rain started 2 minutes after they stopped, light at first. Then it decided to mean business. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, already on his phone with roadside assistance. "I'm going to get someone out here as fast as possible." The nearest service truck was 2 hours away. The resort was still 40 minutes of winding road in the other direction. The temperature had dropped noticeably as the cloud cover came in. "I'm going to look under the hood," Marcus said. He pulled a worn canvas jacket from behind his seat, got out, and that was it. No extended discussion, no asking whether she minded waiting, no performing reluctance. Vivian watched through the windshield as he lifted the hood and bent into the engine. The rain was coming down steadily now, soaking through the canvas jacket within the first minute. His hands moved with deliberate efficiency, not frantic, not theatrical, just working. She sat in the warm back seat with her laptop open. The cursor blinked. She watched him instead. 25 minutes later, he got back in. He was soaked through, a smear of grease across his left forearm, water dripping from his hair. In his hand was a snapped belt, frayed at one end. "Serpentine belt," he said. "I have a spare in the back. I can put it on. It'll take about another 40 minutes in this rain, but it'll get us to the resort. Or we wait for the truck." "That's 2 hours." "It is." She looked at him. "Then fix it." Already planning on it. He went back out. She watched him work for 40 more minutes in the rain without complaint, without checking whether she could see him suffering, without any of the subtle theater of sacrifice that people deploy when they want to be credited for discomfort. He just fixed the problem. By the time they reached the resort, it was past midnight. He was filthy. He had been awake since before 5 in the morning. He pulled up to the entrance and came around to open her door in the same unhurried way he'd opened it outside the Driscoll 12 hours ago. "I'm sorry about the delay," he said. "Don't apologize," Vivian said, and her voice carried an edge of something unfamiliar in it. Not quite warmth, something beginning. "Get some sleep. I'll be ready at 9. She turned and walked inside. At the check-in desk, the concierge asked if everything had been satisfactory with the drive up. "Yes," she said. She went to her room, set her laptop on the desk, sat on the edge of the bed, and then she just sat there in the dark for a while. She had spent the last decade surrounded by capable people, smart people, people who delivered results under pressure without being asked twice. But what Marcus Webb had done out there on that rain-soaked road, it wasn't capability. It wasn't professionalism. It was something that had a different name, and she was lying in a luxury suite at midnight trying to figure out what it was. Character, she thought finally. That's what that was. Not manufactured for an audience, not deployed for advantage. Just there. She hadn't been around a lot of that. She didn't sleep well. If you've ever met a stranger who made you see things you'd stopped looking for, leave a comment. Tell me what happened. The third day arrived already complicated. Something had changed in the grammar of how they moved around each other. The careful professional distance that had organized their first day now felt slightly artificial, present, but no longer effortless to maintain. Vivian found herself watching Marcus more directly instead of through the rearview mirror's safer geometry. The way he hummed to himself on a particularly open stretch of road, barely audible, like he didn't know he was doing it. The relaxation that moved through his whole body when he called Zoe during their lunch break. The way he treated every person they encountered. The resort parking attendant, the gas station cashier, a woman whose grocery bag had split in the convenience store lot. With a naturalness that made it clear he wasn't being kind because it was smart strategy. He was kind because it was who he was. "Tell me about Zoe," Vivian said somewhere on the drive back toward Austin that afternoon. It came out before she decided whether it was appropriate. Marcus glanced in the mirror, and what she saw in his expression, that wasn't professionalism. That was a man whose whole face had just changed. "She's everything," he said. "Smart in ways that catch me off guard. Empathetic in ways I couldn't have taught her. She came with it, I think." He paused. "She wants to be a marine biologist because she decided that ocean animals have a hard enough life as it is, and they deserve someone who pays attention. That's an 8-year-old's reasoning. I didn't have the heart to complicate it." Vivian felt something tighten in her chest, not unpleasantly. "I'd like to talk to her," she said. If it isn't strange, it's probably strange." Marcus looked in the mirror again. "She's been asking about you since I mentioned I had a client. She calls you the serious lady who's not mean. That's a compliment in Zoe's system." Vivian laughed. A short, real laugh that surprised her into covering her mouth. "She'd love to talk to you," he said simply. They stopped at an overlook off a hill country 2-lane, the kind of view that made you feel like Texas was showing off. Limestone ridges layered back into haze, cedar and live oak rolling toward the horizon. Marcus called ahead to warn Zoe they were calling. Then he handed the phone back. The voice that came through was bright and certain and completely uninterested in being anything other than exactly what it was. Are you the serious lady who's not mean? Vivian smiled before she could stop herself. I think that might be me, yes. My dad said you make him work extra hard. He said that in a nice way. He says some people make you want to do your best job. Are you one of those people? I hope so. She hadn't expected to mean it as much as she did. What's your favorite ocean animal? I honestly haven't thought about it in a very long time. That's okay, I'll tell you mine. It's the mantis shrimp. They can punch underwater with the same force as a bullet. David says that's a weird favorite, but I think it's perfect because nobody expects them. Vivian looked out the window at the hill country horizon. I think that might be my new favorite too. Really? Pure delight. Dad, she likes mantis shrimp. She could hear Marcus's laugh from the front seat, quiet and genuine. Zoe talked for 20 minutes, about a school project on tide pools, about Gerald the stuffed sea turtle, about how her dad worked too hard but she understood because he was taking care of them, and about how she'd been practicing braiding hair on Gerald because she wanted to learn. When Vivian handed the phone back, Marcus met her eyes in the mirror for a moment. She looked away first, but she was smiling, and she couldn't remember the last time that had happened without her deciding to. The final evening came the way endings do when you haven't been watching for them. Suddenly, already here. They were on the 183 heading back into Austin, downtown rising in front of them through the amber sunset, and Vivian was aware that in approximately 18 minutes, this arrangement would be over, and with it whatever strange bubble of honesty had grown up around the inside of this car over 3 days. She reached into her bag and pulled out her checkbook. I want to give you something extra, she said. $400 on top of the $1,100. For the car repair, for the rain, for everything. She saw his hands settle on the steering wheel, unhurried, certain. I appreciate it, Marcus said, but no. You spent an hour in a storm fixing an engine you didn't break. That's the job. It was beyond the job. I did what I thought was right to do, he said quietly. You can't price that out separately. If I take extra money for it, then I did it for the extra money. And I didn't. So the money would change what it was. He glanced at her in the mirror. I won't let that happen. We agreed on $1,100. That's what I'll take. Vivian put the checkbook back in her bag. She sat with that for a while. In her world, the world of deal terms and leverage and reciprocal advantage, no one did anything without a price attached. Favors were currencies, gestures were investments. She had become so fluent in that language that she had stopped noticing it was a language at all. Marcus Webb apparently did not speak it. That was the most disorienting thing she'd encountered in years. You're different from people I'm used to, she said, and she didn't try to disguise how much she meant it. He was quiet for a moment. I'm just a man trying to raise his daughter right, he said, and trying to get through each day without losing the things that matter. He paused. That's all. But the way he said it, the steadiness under it, made her hear something she hadn't expected to hear from someone she'd hired for 3 days. Dignity. Uncomplicated and unasked for. They reached the Driscoll. He pulled up to the entrance. She gathered her things more slowly than necessary, aware that she was stalling and reasonably certain he was aware of it too. She stepped out. Thank you, she said, standing on the wet stone under the amber light. For everything. It was my pleasure, Ms. Cole. No formula in it, just true. She walked toward the door, stopped, turned. He was still there beside the SUV, waiting to see that she got inside safely, as if that was part of the job, as if she was someone worth making sure arrived safely. She met his eyes across the damp night air. Something passed between them that neither of them said out loud. The acknowledgement of something that existed and couldn't be undone and probably shouldn't, but was there regardless. Then she turned and walked inside. Marcus stood by the Expedition for a moment in the thin November rain. He got in, started the engine, drove home to Zoe, who was asleep with Gerald under one arm and a book about bioluminescent sea creatures open on her pillow. He sat on the edge of her bed for a minute. I'm home, Bug, he said quietly. She stirred. Mantis shrimp, she murmured, already 90% unconscious. He had absolutely no idea what that meant. He kissed her forehead and went to make himself a sandwich at midnight, standing in the kitchen in his work clothes, staring at the refrigerator magnets, thinking about a woman he had no rational reason to think about. 1 week went by. Vivian threw herself into work with the kind of intensity that could be mistaken, by people who didn't know her, for passion. Her assistant Dana watched her pause mid-sentence 3 times in a single meeting to stare out the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Congress Avenue office with an expression that had no business being on the face of someone who was supposed to be discussing freight network optimization. After the 3rd time, Dana slid a fresh coffee onto the desk without being asked and didn't say anything, which was the correct call. The board meeting at the end of that week brought Wave 1. "We need a decision on the New York office by the end of the quarter," said Richard Holt, her longest-tenured board member, delivering it with the pleasantness of someone who'd been paid to say it. "The partnership we closed in October positions you for significant growth, but the operational and relational gravity is in the Northeast Corridor. We think a permanent executive presence there is necessary. We think your presence." Vivian nodded. "I understand the reasoning." "We need more than understanding. You'll have my decision by the end of the quarter," she said evenly. She drove herself home that night. That was unusual. She passed Garcia's diner on the way, which didn't make geographic sense for her route home. She drove past it anyway. The lights were on. She could see a couple inside at the counter. She kept going. On a Saturday afternoon, 11 days after the job had ended, Vivian found herself in her car in East Austin. She had told herself, when she'd looked up the address in the contract paperwork, that she was simply confirming she had it, that she was not going to use it, that crossing that boundary was irrational, and she was not irrational. She was sitting in front of a 2-story apartment complex on a street where someone had painted a mural of the Austin skyline on the retaining wall, and the mural was slightly better than the actual skyline. She had Zoe's gift in the passenger seat, a marine biology kit she'd spent an embarrassing 45 minutes choosing in a toy store on South Congress, the kind of time she didn't spend on anything that wasn't worth spending it on. She got out of the car. Marcus answered on the second knock, and the expression that moved across his face in the half-second before he controlled it told her 2 things, that he was surprised and that he wasn't entirely displeased. "Ms. Cole, I wasn't... Is everything okay?" "I brought something for Zoe," she said, holding up the bag. "I know this is probably outside of whatever the protocol is. If it's not a good time, I can..." From behind Marcus, a voice. "Dad! Dad, it's the serious lady!" Zoe appeared at his hip, dark hair in 2 lopsided ponytails, wearing a t-shirt that had a blue whale on it and the words, "Ocean Enthusiast," in block letters. She looked at Vivian with the complete openness of a child who had not yet learned to perform neutrality. "You're taller than I thought," Zoe informed her. "You're exactly as I imagined," Vivian replied. Zoe smiled the biggest, most uncomplicated smile Vivian had seen on an adult or a child in a very long time. "Come in." Marcus stepped aside. The apartment was small and full of life in the specific way that spaces are when someone has stopped apologizing for what they have and just lived in it. Children's drawings on the fridge door, a bookshelf made from stacked milk crates that held 3 rows of library books, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, the kind with small pieces, 1,000 of them, featuring the ocean floor. A kitchen with mismatched mugs on the open shelf, and a yellow construction paper drawing of a sea turtle taped above the sink that was clearly Zoe's. On the counter, a note that said, "Zoe, don't forget to feed Gerald's fish cousins," beside a small tank with 2 small fish that presumably were not actually Gerald's cousins, but had been given the role. Vivian sat on the couch while Zoe opened the marine biology kit with the particular reverence of a child who has received something that confirms their life's direction. When she got to the deep-sea creature specimens preserved in resin, she looked up at Vivian with an expression that crossed reverence with suspicion. "Is one of these a mantis shrimp?" "Third one from the left." Zoe picked it up very carefully. "This is the best gift I have ever received." "You're 8, Marcus said from the kitchen. "In my top 3, then," Zoe revised, without looking away from the shrimp. Marcus made tea, which Vivian hadn't expected. He brought it out on a tray, which she also hadn't expected. He sat in the armchair across from the couch and didn't make a production of the fact that his former client was sitting in his living room on a Saturday afternoon because she'd shown up uninvited. Zoe insisted they stay for dinner. Dinner was pasta, linguine with a jarred sauce that Marcus augmented with garlic and cherry tomatoes from a bowl on the counter and something from a small, dried herb jar that he didn't name. They ate at a table for three with mismatched chairs, and Zoe held court, explaining the difference between bioluminescence and phosphorescence with the confidence of someone presenting a TED Talk. After Zoe was in bed, negotiations had occurred over the precise number of pages to be read aloud, and a compromise was reached at 11 pages, which Marcus had clearly given ground on. The apartment went quiet in the particular way that apartments go quiet when the specific person who generates most of the sound has been removed. They moved to the small back porch by some unspoken agreement. The November air was cool and dry, the kind of Austin evening that made people remember why they stayed. The courtyard below was lit by a single lamp. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing guitar quietly. Vivian spoke first because she'd been rehearsing, and if she didn't say it now, she was going to drive back to her penthouse and sit with it for another week while her board waited for an answer about New York. "I've been thinking about you," she said. "Not in a, I know how that sounds. I know we were in a professional arrangement for 72 hours. I'm aware of how this sounds. But I've been thinking about you every day, and I wanted to say that in person because I'm better in person than in anything I'd write." Marcus set his mug down on the porch railing. "I've been thinking about you too," he said. And then, in the same breath, "But I have to be careful, not just for myself. For Zoe. For Zoe." He looked at her directly. "I can't bring someone into her life who's going to decide 3 months from now that the life I actually have is less compelling than whatever she thought it was going to be. She's already lost someone she loved. I won't let that happen again." "You think this is a whim?" "I think you're a woman who works 90-hour weeks and lives in a building I can't afford to valet at," he said, not unkindly. "And 3 days on the road showed you something you'd been missing. But wanting something different from your life for a little while isn't the same as wanting this life. My life. The one with the mismatched chairs and the fish and the 11-page bedtime negotiations." "Marcus," she said, and saying his name without the professional buffer of Mr. Webb cost her something. "I work 90-hour weeks because I never had a reason not to. I live in that building because I chose efficiency over everything that makes a home, and I told myself that was fine. Those aren't things I'm proud of. They're things I've been trying to explain to myself for a while." She exhaled. "During those 3 days, I felt like a person. Not a title, not a decision maker, not a line item on someone's strategic plan. You treated me like a person whose hunger mattered, who shouldn't be alone on a mountain road in the rain, who was worth talking to." She paused. "Zoe asked me if I had empathy. I've been thinking about that for 11 days. I think the honest answer is that I've been too busy building things to practice it. And I want to learn." Marcus was quiet for a long time. The guitar continued somewhere below. "I can't offer you easy," he said at last. "I can't offer you exciting or sophisticated or any version of the life you're used to. What I can offer you, honestly, consistently, is someone who sees you. Not what you're worth, not what you run. You." He looked at her. "If that's enough to start with, then maybe we can figure out the rest as it comes." It was the most careful, most honest declaration she had ever received. She had been offered grand gestures by men who confused presentation with feeling. She had been approached by people who wanted proximity to what she'd built. This man was sitting on a plastic chair on a second-floor porch in East Austin, telling her quietly that he saw her. That was everything. "That's enough," she said. "That's more than enough." 6 months. The changes in Vivian's life, if you had shown them to her former self in a forecast, would have looked like data entered into the wrong spreadsheet. She had declined the permanent New York relocation, sent the board a letter with her reasoning, which was measured and professional, and did not mention Marcus Webb or mantis shrimp, or the understanding she'd arrived at about what she actually wanted her life to contain. Richard Holt had not been pleased. She had held firm anyway. It turned out that holding firm on things that mattered wasn't actually more difficult than holding firm on things that didn't. She'd just never made the distinction before. She had promoted her operations director, a steady woman named Priya, who had deserved the expanded role for 2 years, into a position that let Vivian work 3 days a week remotely and 2 in the office instead of 6. The penthouse on the west side, sleek, silent, $2, $1 million of unobstructed skyline, was under contract. She was moving into a craftsman house 3 blocks from Zoe's school, with a yard and a porch and a kitchen too small to be elegant and absolutely perfect for 3 people who liked to be in the same room while food was being made. Marcus had accepted the position of operations coordinator for Cole Meridian's Southwest Fleet, a role that used his knowledge of vehicles, routes, and logistics in ways that were genuinely interesting to him, paid $74,000 a year, and let him be home when Zoe got off the school bus. The $1,100 job that had started all of it now felt like an origin story they would tell differently depending on who was asking. But the numbers weren't the story. The story was Saturday mornings at the farmers market on South Congress, where Zoe insisted on choosing the flowers for the table and would spend 12 focused minutes selecting the exact right combination. The story was learning, on Vivian's part, to braid hair at the kitchen table while Zoe supervised with the authority of someone who had been practicing on a stuffed sea turtle and considered herself a qualified instructor. The story was cooking dinner in a kitchen that would probably never be renovated into something magazine-worthy and discovering that this was fine, that the food tasted better in proportion to how little the kitchen cared about its own appearance. The story was lying on the porch on a Sunday afternoon reading separate books and not needing to say anything for a long time. Wave 2 came in March. A piece ran in a business publication, the kind that framed gossip as analysis, suggesting that Vivian Cole's decision to decline the New York relocation reflected a CEO who was distracted by personal circumstances and whose sharpness and focus have been questioned internally. The source was a former colleague she'd passed over for a partnership 3 years ago, whose motivation was not difficult to identify. The board called an emergency conversation. Vivian sat at the head of the conference table and let Richard Holt finish his prepared remarks. Then she pulled up the quarterly numbers. Revenue up 11% over the same period last year. Fleet efficiency improved. 2 new regional partnerships closed. Client retention at 93%. She laid each slide down like cards. "Distracted people don't put up these numbers," she said. "What they've noticed is that I'm less available for dinners I used to attend to be seen at. Those dinners were not producing results. These numbers are." She closed the laptop. "If the board has a concern about performance, I'm happy to address it. If the concern is that I'm not performing my life the way I used to, that's a different conversation, and it's not one I'll be having here." Silence. Then Priya, from her new seat at the table, said quietly, "The numbers speak." The motion to revisit the relocation question was tabled. On a Wednesday evening in April, the 3 of them were on the new porch of the Craftsman House. Vivian reading, Marcus working through a logistics report on his laptop, Zoe stretched across the top porch step with Gerald the sea turtle under one arm and a chapter book in her hands. The yard was catching the last of the sun. Zoe set down her book with the particular deliberateness of someone who has been thinking something for a while and has decided the time has come. "Vivian," she said. Are you going to be my mom?" Marcus's typing stopped. Vivian lowered her book. Zoe was looking at her with the directness of a child who genuinely just wanted to know the answer to a question she'd been carrying around. "Would you want that?" Vivian asked carefully, aware that her heart was somewhere in her throat. Zoe appeared to consider this with appropriate seriousness for about 3 seconds. "Yes, because you make my dad smile again. Like, smile for real, not the polite kind. And you let me pick my own outfits even when they don't match. And you're learning to braid even though you're bad at it. And you sang in the car last week and you really can't sing, but you did it anyway. She paused. And because when I had a bad dream and came out to the kitchen at 2 in the morning, you made me hot chocolate and didn't ask what the dream was. You just sat with me. Another pause. Mom used to do that. The yard was very quiet. Marcus was looking at his daughter with an expression Vivian had never seen on any human face before. Something between grief and gratitude so intertwined they were the same thing. Vivian blinked, once, steadying herself. I would be honored to be your mom, she said, if you'll teach me how to do it right. Zoe tilted her head. It's not that complicated. You just love people enough that they feel safe. You're already good at that part. She picked up her book again. The braiding you still need to work on. Marcus laughed. The real kind. The kind that came from the bottom of something true, and reached over and covered Vivian's hand with his. She looked at the yard, at the light going golden across it, at the little girl reading on the porch step with a sea turtle under her arm. She had built a company. She had managed 100 decisions a day for 15 years. She had negotiated deals worth more than she could hold in her head at once. None of it had ever felt like this. Not even close. Later, after Zoe was asleep and the house had settled into its nighttime sounds, Vivian sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea she'd made herself. In the correct mug, after months of being corrected by an 8-year-old about which mug was right for different kinds of tea, and thought about the distance from that rainy October night to here. $1,100 for 3 days of work, a crayon portrait on a dashboard, a broken belt on a mountain road, a phone call at a roadside overlook, a little girl's question about empathy that she'd been genuinely trying to answer ever since. Wealth, she had learned, was a word she'd been using incorrectly for a long time. It wasn't the amount in an account or the view from a building or the leverage you held in a room. It was accumulation of the right things, the right kind of warmth in a room when everyone you love is in it, the safety that came from choosing, every day, not just once, to stay and be real with the people who were real with you. A $1,100 job had looked, at the time, like a transaction. It had turned out to be a door. She hadn't known what was on the other side. She was glad she'd walked through it. Every now and then, life sends you something that doesn't look like what it is. A 3-day job, a rain-soaked road, a child who asks the right question. Not the life you planned, not the one that looked right on paper. The one that, when you're in it, makes you feel like you finally stopped performing and just arrived. That's what this story is about. If it moved something in you, if it reminded you of something you've been missing or something you already have that you haven't been paying attention to, subscribe to. There are more of these. Stories that cost nothing to hear and maybe change the way you see. The world is full of people fixing cars in the rain who will never ask you to notice. Notice anyway.